Ailments in games tend to be very complicated, and Last Epoch is no exception. Also, there's about 1.5 million of them, even more than damage types in Grim Dawn. So today, I'm going to try to demystify things a little bit, but I want to make expectations clear. For almost every rule involving ailments, there are exceptions. For example, damaging ailments deal damage over time, except for shadow daggers. And so today, I'm going to be talking about the rules that apply to most things. But if you encounter an exception through your gameplay, either via a unique item or one specific ailment, don't worry about it too much. And so for now, let's get into those ailments in a little bit more detail. But first, if you like this kind of content, do be sure to get subscribed, leave a like while you're down there, and look forward to more videos going into this build once I finish playing around with it. So in general, you can divide ailments into two broader categories: the non-damaging ailments, which debuff enemies, and the damaging ailments, which may also debuff enemies, but kill them really quick. Some common examples of non-damaging ailments that you'll encounter are things like Chill, reducing enemy move, attack, and cast speed; Slow, which specifically reduces their movement speed; or Shredding resistances. There's a lot of builds that use these more utility/debuff type ailments, even if they aren't an ailment build. And plenty of enemies inflict these on you as well. So getting something like a skill that can cleanse is definitely advisable, especially as you go later on into the endgame. Now, if an ailment has a maximum stack count, it will specify on the tooltip. So for example, Chill can only stack up to 3 times. But if it doesn't specify a maximum stack count, then just assume that it can stack infinitely. A good example of this would be Armor Shred. Though each stack reduces enemy armor by 100, a flat value, so the more stacks you have, the less effective each subsequent stack is. Yes, by overstacking tons and tons of Armor Shred, you are slowly but surely increasing the damage enemies take, but each stack is technically less effective than the last, and if you're an ailment build, well, most damaging ailments are damage over time, and that completely bypasses armor anyway. But hey, at least Res Shred will still be useful. But in my opinion, the damaging ailments are the far more interesting ones. Some examples of this could be Bleed, Electrify, Ignite, or Poison. Bleed deals physical damage over time. Electrify deals lightning damage over time. Ignite deals fire damage over time. And Poison deals poison damage over time, which isn't to be confused with poison damage over time from poison skills that is not in fact a poison ailment. Like I said, ailments are nice and simple. Because each ailment has its own base damage and its own base duration, not all ailments are equal. For example, you need a lot more stacks of poison at its 28 base damage to equal the damage from 1 stack of Doom, which does a whopping 400 base damage, or about 100 damage per second. The thing is, Doom can only stack 4 total times, whereas poison can stack, well, as fast as you attack. Because that's the thing about a lot of these stackable damaging ailments. There's technically no cap to them. It just depends on how fast you can attack and what your chance to poison is. Another important thing to note about ailments is their damage scaling works a little bit differently from hits. For example, hits can normally crit. Ailments cannot. Though again, there are some occasional exceptions, like shadow daggers. Added damage doesn't apply to damage over time ailments, whereas it might to damage over time spells. This means if your weapon says added spell damage, yeah, that line doesn't matter. Also, ailments themselves are applied on hit, but their ticks do not innately hit, so no, you can't make an infinite ailmentception build, whereby you have the ticks from one ailment apply another. So now let's get into a bit of a practical example using a character I'm playing right now. So let's take a look at a build using damaging ailments, in this case, a Bleed Warlock, that deals most of its damage by stacking lots of very scary numbers on the enemy. Yeah, those bleed stacks, they can get very, very high, especially if you spam the Chaos Bolts. Oh look, we're passing 200, let's see if we can do 300. Alright, not quite. I need a little bit more gear. Oh, there we made it, just barely. So these are just one of the ways that you can make an ailment build. Some ailments stack, some ailments don't. Most ailments deal damage over time. But one very key thing for damaging ailments is they all have a base damage, which means they're very good at low levels. That's why ailments are some of the best ways to level across all builds, because if Bleed does base damage, it doesn't matter how good or bad your gear is, your gear can only make it better from a baseline, which means if your gear is absolutely terrible, the baseline's still really good, and all you have to do is hit as fast as possible, Remember, damaging ailments are only applied on hit or over time by certain skills. So, if you want to see a little bit more information about your ailments, you can find it here. This is not exactly all-inclusive. Much like how tooltips don't really tell you the full story, this also doesn't. Because yeah, one bleed might do 304 damage. But remember, I had 300 bleeds on the target, so my damage is going to be a lot higher. Also, bleed chance, well, it depends, because some skills have specific chance to inflict bleeding. Also, some effects cause you to inflict bleeding when you hit enemies. For example, in the Spirit Plague tree, Laceration, you have a chance to apply bleed when you hit an enemy afflicted by Spirit Plague. This does not show up at all in that stat sheet, so the stat sheet is fine as a start. It gives you a little bit of information, but it is not a be-all or end-all. There's a few ways that you can scale all of these juicy ailments. The first is by simply hitting more, because if you hit more, well, then just like how me hard-casting Chaos Bolts in addition to the Chthonic Fissure stacks more bleeds than me just putting down a Chthonic Fissure, you'll get more ailments on the target. Alternatively, you can have a higher ailment chance, since chance to apply ailments over 100% does cause you to inflict multiple stacks for ailments which stack. Or you could increase the duration of ailments. So coming over here, I have Frostbite Shackles on, which give 24% increased frostbite duration, meaning the frostbite ailment lasts 24% longer, and therefore I can stack more of them on the target. Duration is also somewhat helpful for ailments that don't stack, simply for the quality of life of not having to constantly reapply your damage. And remember, just like how you can stack a bunch of ailments on enemies, they can do the same on you, which is why, for example, the Exsanguinous chest can be really cool. It gives you immunity to bleed at low health. So as long as your health is low, like mine is here, then I'm immune to any bleed effects that enemies stack on me, or any that I stack on myself. Which, yes, that's also a thing, and I can stack a ton of bleeds on myself. So if you want to turn the enemy's health bar entirely rainbow, consider an ailment build. But also, consider an ailment build the next time you're planning to level, since overall, they're a really smooth and efficient way to play. Remember, debuffing or non-damaging ailments are often very good at enhancing the things that you do, lowering enemy resistances, causing them to be more vulnerable to other status effects, or just slowing them down so that you can escape. But damaging ailments are all about the numbers, except you don't have to worry about crits, you just have to worry about hitting as much as possible. And very often, it's a very, very good way to make a super defensive character, because it doesn't require you to scale crits. It doesn't require a very good weapon. I mean, your weapon suffixes might be important, but weapon prefixes are just generic damage mods. And even those only apply sometimes. For example here, increased damage over time, increased fizz damage, it's an okay wand. The base isn't necessarily the most lightning spell damage, but that doesn't matter because I'm a bleed build. So it gives me a lot more flexibility to grab all the ignite on hit wands. You might be saying, wait a minute, but you're a bleed build, why ignite? Much like with damage types, ailments can also be converted. Blood Gulch removes the fire tag from Chthonic Fissure and instead adds a physical tag. As part of this, all ignite chance becomes bleed chance. This is why, when I spam on the dummy, with Chaos Bolts and with Chthonic Fissure, you don't see a ton of ignites, you just see a ton of bleeds, because I'm using nodes which convert things over, thus giving me a much higher chance to bleed enemies in exchange for a much lower chance to ignite enemies. Though hey, a few do still make it through. Now if you take nothing else away from this video, just remember, for almost every rule that I've mentioned in regards to ailments, there is an exception, somehow and somewhere among all the massive number of ailments in Last Epoch. These are very much more of guidelines that will apply to most things rather than everything. It's also important to remember that ailments are going to be a key part of your build in one way or another, whether you're an actual bleed build or you're scaling something using an ailment like Shred. And if you want to know more about how to scale damage or ailments in Last Epoch, then I'll link to a video that I made talking about damage scaling more generally and getting into other things like how to scale hit damage. I'll also link to an ailments article over at Maxwell that goes into the ailment scaling in a little bit more detail. Now coming from Path of Exile, I made a pretty big mistake with ailments in Last Epoch when I first played the game, which is assuming that by increasing the base hit damage, I would increase the ailment, since this is more or less how it works in PoE. If you increase the skill's base damage, you increase the damage the ailment inflicted by it does. Yeah, nope, that's not how it works at all, and I wasted quite a bit of time scaling stuff. But hey, after doing a little bit of reading and actually checking my tooltips, I learned I was doing it wrong and quickly fixed the mistake. So I'm curious, did you go into this with the same assumption, or did you have an open mind? Let me know down in the comments below. Now, before I go, I'd like to take a minute to thank the patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. Unfortunately, YouTube AdSense is extremely unreliable, so support like this is very crucial in my ability to keep creating content. And hey, you might even see your name on screen if you use the link down below to support. With that said, thank you very much to everyone who watched to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know ailments can be a little bit confusing when you first start playing, but hopefully this video helped to demystify it. Maybe you learned a tip or trick here and there, and I'll see you again in the next one.